Welcome to Watch the Booker Man and to another episode of WCW Nitro coming up today, the fallout to the final special episode of WCW Nitro that we'll be doing, that being because in 5 weeks time, just over 5 weeks time, we have WCW Starrcade 19, the second pay-per-view of the save, the first being the Big Bang back in May that kicked all of this off. And then in 2002, the plan is to go back to a normal pay-per-view schedule. So now we are very much back to the build to Starrcade. I've got a decision here. I can't think of anybody I've negotiated with, which makes me think it's one thing. I'm expecting this is going to be Shawn Stasiak requesting his release. He's unhappy and wants to leave. Now, I've basically criticised every time that I've seen him. I don't think much of him, but I'm going to reject it. If you won't accept my release, then I'm just going to sit it out. Okay, so that's a little bit pointless, isn't it? I take it that I just can't use him then now. He's got a contract, hasn't he? Shawn. I mean, I was done jobbing him out, to be fair. He lost to Guido for that very reason. He was then going to go away, probably be the first person, along with Mike Sanders, to be sent down to development. I don't really know what to say about that. Do I just release him then now? Yeah, there's basically nothing I can do about that, is there? I did semi-expect it, but I was going to reject it. I might as well have sacked him now and maybe come back in the future. I always thought Shawn Stasiak was older than that as well, so I'm going to see what it looks like when we get to the show. Like, if I try and use him on Nitro, will he just not be an option? Will it come up in the absent person screen? I do just want to see that, so I'm not going to release him just yet, but probably on the Thursday after this episode of Nitro, he will be going. Brian Lawler has 30 days left on his contract. Does that bring him? Yeah, so he'll be gone before Starrcade at this stage. I'm just going to leave that as a maybe. I don't think I'm going to need him, even for Starrcade. So I'm not going to negotiate with Brian Lawler just yet. But he's, of course, still got a part to play in this King's Court Extreme Outsiders storyline, which has been going on for quite some time now. I'm sure you'll all agree. But it does come to an end at Starrcade, and I'm really looking forward to this episode of Nitro. The last few weeks we've been on the road to Starrcade, but I have had in the back of my mind we do need to build to this big uncensored show. Now, there's nothing else inhibiting me from just focusing everything on where the storylines go for uncensored, and this is going to be a big episode that kicks off a lot of these big angles that we've got going towards Starrcade. I'm mainly thinking of Lance Storm's reaction to his defeat with Rob Van Dam that sets into place his planned match at Starrcade, which is going to be a big featured match and a really good landmark moment for him. And we're also setting into place the main event storyline, and by the end of this episode of Nitro, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what we're going to see at Starrcade for the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Could it be Big Van Vader shocking the world and maintaining his undefeated streak with a victory over Booker T? Or will our world champion win his final defense of the title before Starrcade? Again, it's been a quiet week apart from Shawn Stasiak requesting his release, and we're into WCW Nitro. Nobody is getting the night off here tonight, and we are going to go to the Michigan State Fairground Coliseum for tonight's show, locked into the Great Lakes, and with not very many stored creative ideas left. I'm hoping to be able to use that DDP storyline idea soon, and Lance Storm, while not in action tonight, he will be picking up a win, hopefully on the road to Starrcade, but I will get another creative finish. Well, that's a bit, Ric Flair hasn't been used as an active wrestler, but when we do, or if we do eventually put him in the ring, at least we've got something there. I will take an angle idea as well, a big gamble with Booker T that I'm not going to be taking, so we'll use the final remaining points, a bit of a gamble on Scott Steiner, so not really got much of what we wanted there, but I do have a creative finish for use on tonight's main event. If I choose to, probably won't actually, because I think Booker v Big Van Vader will be a good match. Rodney and Diamond Dallas Page not getting along, Rodney and Christian Cage not getting along, Dusty Rhodes passing on tips to DDP at getting better at booking. Active wrestlers aren't going to be on my booking team, so bit of a waste of time there. Or we never know when DDP might retire. To be fair, he wasn't in great condition, was he, at this time? Fit Finlay did his usual training drills. And now it's time to see who the morale officer has upset this week, Hugh Morrus being the only one. Thankfully, I'm not going to address the roster as we go into the follow-up to WCW Uncensored, We had a really great show last week, and we'll also be following some stuff up from the week before. As is often the case, I forget to put the pre-booking into the game. But we've got Booker T versus Big Van Vader. We've got Andrew Martin and Christian against Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire. And we also have Steve Corino and Bob Sapp, wherever they might be, facing Dustin Rhodes and Diamond Dallas Page. I'm going to go through all the storylines and update them because we are now on the final build to Starrcade, and this is the first night of that 5-week road. So hopefully I've got the show planned out already, so it is going to be a good episode, but hopefully everything goes to plan. So Nitro begins with the Triad making their way down to the ring, with Big Van Vader taking centre stage, Kanyon speaking about the main event of tonight's show, where he will challenge Booker T for the World Heavyweight Championship. Kanyon admits that Booker T beat him, and he got lucky against Kurt Hennig at Halloween Havoc. However, Kanyon knows that Booker T cannot beat Big Van Vader. Nobody can beat Big Van Vader. Kanyon, however, also has a warning for the Nature Boy Ric Flair tonight, who is apparently going to be in the corner of Booker T for tonight's main event. His advice is simple, or his warning: don't do it. Kanyon says that if Ric Flair comes between the Triad and the World Heavyweight Championship tonight, then he will regret it. As the three men surround the Nature Boy, the Natural Born Thrillers come out and back him up. When the numbers are now evened up, the Triad decide to back off, figuring that their best bet is not to get physically involved before the main event. O'Haire and Palumbo are in their ring gear and they look ready for a fight. Ric Flair shakes hands and thanks Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire, and the reason that they're fired up and ready for a fight tonight is because they are in the opening match. Now you can see the part that involves Ric Flair's promo getting an 86, really lifting this segment up from where it was, and I've changed a few of the storyline names and started some new ones tonight, so hopefully everything looking forward to Starrcade. But before then, we do have a huge main event match for the World Heavyweight Championship, and the opening match, the debut of the new tag team Andrew Martin and Christian Cage, defeating the Natural Born Thrillers in 9 minutes and 20, Andrew Martin pinning Sean O'Haire following a big boot, but Christian Cage does grab the leg of Sean O'Haire towards the end of the match, and then he turns into that big boot, so a bit of a distraction, but no major cheating. We did send them out to try and steal the show, and a 72 with a 74 from Christian Cage and a 71 from Andrew Martin is absolutely incredible to see. Really encouraging start for both of them, and I think it does show you that the level of people that we are bringing from the WWF, they're on another planet to us, to be fair. And even Andrew Martin, who probably would have been seen as a very middling performer in the WWF, for where we are compared to, say, the Natural Born Thrillers and a lot of other people on our roster, their ability and popularity does mean that even though we may be overpaid for these guys, they were definitely worth bringing onto the show. And this is only the second defeat for the Natural Born Thrillers since March. That other defeat was to the Road Warriors, who they then got the victory back over on. So a big moment and a huge win for Andrew Martin and Christian Cage. Now, I did have a tag team name in mind for these two, but I think it kind of works that we skip this out. Now, really poor segment here, actually, and this was supposed to be a major segment, and I've not put the storyline that they should be advancing. For some reason, it's not advanced it, so I'm going to go through this segment and then I'm going to check why that is. But Lance Storm comes out as Andrew Martin and Christian Cage celebrate their victory, and just as a little word with them off microphone, the two guys shake hands with Lance, and then Andrew Martin and Christian Cage leave. Lance Storm then takes a microphone and says that before he gets to the real reason he's out here, he wants to speak to Mike Awesome. He hasn't heard from him all week, and he needs to get something straight before he moves on to the bigger topic that he wants to discuss. Mike comes out, and Lance's question is simple. Where were you last week? Mike Awesome says that he saw Lance speaking with Martin and Cage backstage at the Hammerstein Ballroom, and he assumed that they were talking about Canadian stuff again, so he just left them to it. There's a little bit of a smugness to Mike Awesome when he says this. Mike says maybe if Lance had let him in on their plan beforehand, things might have worked out for the better, but as it was, he lost to Rob Van Dam. This makes an angry Lance Storm even angrier, and he tells Mike to stand here behind him and shut up, because he's calling out Shane McMahon. The WCW owner comes to the ring and asks what Lance could possibly have to complain about last week. He tried to cheat, and then he failed, and then he lost. What could he possibly find to complain about? In fact, that's now 3 straight defeats for Lance Storm. That's not good for somebody who is so desperate to be on the Starrcade card in a prominent position. Lance says that this isn't about last week, this is about Shane McMahon, this is about him being a dictator who cannot stand when somebody stands up to him and therefore sets him up to fail. Lance says that he would hold all the gold in this company if it wasn't for Shane McMahon, but he shouldn't be surprised. Shane's family does have a record for screwing over Canadian icons like him before. Shane fires back at this, calling Lance Storm ridiculous. If Lance hates it so much here, how about he just goes and walks away and finds someone else? Shane has got enough to deal with in the build to Starrcade, and he's getting out of here. Lance's choice is to either suck it up or go find the door. Shane then turns around, but Lance calls Shane back as if he's got one more thing to say, only to super kick the owner of WCW and knock him out cold. The first time in the entire save, of course, that anybody has been able to get physical with Shane McMahon, and of course this is Lance Storm's boss, so we really put across here that this is an absolutely shocking moment. The commentators cannot believe it. Even Mike Awesome cannot believe that Lance has crossed this line. Mike asking Lance, what the hell are you thinking? Storm himself even kind of looks a little shaken, taken back by what he's done. He didn't think that it would go this far, but anger got the better of him and he has laid out his boss. Awesome leads Storm away from the crime scene as Shane McMahon is checked on in the ring. Now this is a bit of a reverse anti-authority gimmick because Lance Storm is the heel, and hopefully Shane McMahon is still well liked enough by the WCW audience that Storm does get booed for this, although I do think there's a coolness element to anybody who is willing to kick their own boss in the face, so hopefully it comes across as designed in that we've made Lance Storm detestable enough and Shane McMahon likeable enough that this goes over well. But with the rating only being a 54, it does suggest to me that as good as the direction for this is and where it leads, I'm really happy with. The fact that we're going to have Lance Storm cutting promos in the build to this and maybe having other guys on screen who aren't as popular as him or Shane McMahon, I might have to sort of rethink the direction of this a little bit in terms of the angles that get us to the match that I'm building to. Returning from the break, the commentators discuss what happened to Shane McMahon. That's definitely not a moment that you can just move on from, so it is going to be referenced throughout the night. You don't want a big moment like that just being seen as part of the show. It's supposed to be a seismic moment that kind of changes the dynamic. Shane has been this untouchable boss figure, trying his best to be fair and impartial. Well, this is the night that changes. We can never put the toothpaste back in the tube here. Impartiality is out of the window when it comes to Lance Storm, and we see footage of that super kick that the boss received from the former United States champion. We are told that Lance Storm was immediately escorted from the building, and then we send to an interview with Booker T, who is asked about the World Heavyweight Championship match that he will be in tonight against Big Van Vader. But Booker T first comments on Lance Storm, asking, "Tell me I did not just see that." He then does switch attention to the main event, Booker T saying that Vader knows what it means to hold this title, and Booker has watched him tear through the entire WCW roster for months and months and months. Booker knows that he has to be on his A game tonight, but reminds us that Ric Flair will be in his corner, so if Kanyon or Hennig try anything, then they're going to have to deal with the Nature Boy, further hyping up the main event. But you can see here that we kind of mix in a few storylines together tonight, a lot of overlap and stuff, which I do think adds a little bit more texture to the storylines that we're building, and hopefully that comes across with the rest of tonight's show, because again, we are going to have to follow up this moment. It's a huge moment that takes over everything, to the point that we next see Shane McMahon returning to his office, where Arn Anderson and Ric Flair are in conversation. Now, Rick was supposed to be speaking with Shane, obviously, at this point, but Lance's actions have thrown a spanner in the works. Shane is clearly still shaken by what went down, but he's not physically incapacitated because this is Shane McMahon, and Rick asks him how he's feeling and says that he guesses now probably isn't a good time to talk business. Shane says that they will get to that, but he first has to deal with what just went down, and asks Shane what he's got in mind, and Shane says it's simple to him, he's got to go. He tells Arn to speak to legal, get those termination papers written up, and deliver them to him this week. Arn asks if he's sure, and Shane says that he is dead serious. So a little bit of like, Arn maybe feels this is an overreaction, firing a wrestler for taking him down, even though we do sort of see people attack each other out of line every week. So it's whether you say Shane understandably is a special case as the owner, or is Lance partially correct here in suggesting that this is a bit of a power trip for Shane when Arn leaves the room. Ric Flair also kind of questions this decision. Are you really just going to let him get away with that, is his angle? So yeah, he's been kicked in the face by Lance. Shane, we know, is a fighter, but in this case he is taking the high road and just firing Lance Storm. Shane says that he would love to go find Lance and kick his ass, but he's already left the building. Shane is going to deal with this the right way, and Lance can be somebody else's problem. He adds that when Arn gets back, they can get down to why Shane invited him here tonight for his guest role on Nitro. But until then, we head back to the ring for our second match of the night. Now we see the first thing that stands out to me, Bob Sapp with a 16 rating, so I'm happy that this match gets a 62 considering that. All roads lead to the NWA World title, maybe giving away the direction that I have in mind for this, but we have Steve Corino attempt to cheat using his NWA World Heavyweight Championship, but DDP ducks out the way and Corino accidentally hits Bob Sapp. Corino is then sent to the outside by DDP, who hits a diamond cutter, then tags in Dustin Rhodes, who maybe not hitting the lifting reverse DDT, but hits a finisher to Bob Sapp, giving him the 1-2-3. So Bob Sapp pinned, having not really been built up that much as an unstoppable monster, but as a couple of people have mentioned, he's being written out in 4 weeks to go train for an MMA fight, and that's probably going to be the end of his current run in WCW anyway, and then we'll put him down in development and bring him back when we have a new idea for him. The important part here is that Dustin Rhodes, albeit as part of a tag team match, is again on the winning side against the NWA World Heavyweight Champion Steve Corino, and we end the first half of this show with Steve Corino standing at the bottom of the ramp, his head in his hands, his plan clearly backfiring. He thought that him and Bob would be able to get the job done, but far from it, as DDP and Dustin Rhodes stand tall. Dustin Rhodes gestures around his waist. He wants that NWA World Heavyweight Championship that was previously and of course very famously held by his father, Dusty Rhodes. Returning to the back, we see Andrew Martin and Christian Cage being approached by Arn Anderson in the back, expecting to be told when they'll be getting their World Tag Team Championship shot. Does that stipulation where if you beat the champions still apply? Arn Anderson says that that isn't why he's here to speak to them, and the two men then suggest, okay, we'll go and talk directly to Shane McMahon instead. Arn warns against this given the mood that the boss is in tonight, especially given that, you know, they're close friends of Lance Storm. He's here instead to tell Andrew Martin that he'll be going one-on-one with Sean O'Haire next week. As Arn Anderson walks off, he says if they speak to their buddy Lance, let him know that he's expected to be here next week. Anderson says that Shane wants to make sure that the consequences of this are just as public as the actions taken by Lance Storm. Andrew Martin and Christian are kind of saying this is nothing to do with us. Why don't you just focus on making sure that we get what's owed to us and we can keep out of anything that's going on between Shane and Lance. So this is actually part of the storyline now. So I've called it Shane Storm, and yeah, underway with that storyline with a solid rating. We do bring down the tag team title storyline, but I'm happy with a 62 involving these guys. We then get Rob Van Dam cutting a poor promo. The idea of this segment, once I go through it, you'll understand, but Billy Kidman is literally just sat in the audience saying nothing, and we get a note that he underperformed. I know I'm nitpicking at this point, but Billy Kidman, you really couldn't be more in my bad books. RVD makes his way out to the ring. The commentator is putting over his victory over Lance Storm last week, which seemingly pushed his long-term rival over the edge. RVD takes a microphone and says that between Billy Kidman and Lance Storm earlier, he seems to be having a crazy effect on people at the minute. Now he's done with Lance Storm, and that guy seems to be done full stop. He needs to address Billy Kidman. RVD basically unscripted runs down Billy Kidman, burying everything about him and basically just putting all the feelings that I've shared over the last few weeks into something that works as a wrestling promo, because basically we've had enough of Billy Kidman, and something I've actually enjoyed during this save, to be fair, as bad as it sounds, is burying people when I feel like they deserve it. Following his rant, Rob Van Dam says that he challenged Billy Kidman to come out and fight him right now, but he knows that Billy would rather sit in the rafters on his own, looking moody. the camera cuts to show Billy Kidman doing just that. So that's Billy's only involvement in the segment, and he underperforms and brings it down. Rough Van Dam says that he's going to keep this simple. Billy doesn't deserve a United States Championship shot. Everybody in the world can see that. But that guy feels like he's owed one just because he's been here for years and years and years. With Starrcade just around the corner, RVD wants to put this behind him and focus on somebody who deserves a title shot on pay-per-view. So he's willing to give Kidman a shot at his title next week under one condition. When he beats Billy Kidman, Kidman stays away from him and they are done. Getting up from his seat, Billy Kidman tells RVD, "You've got it, don't worry about that." So instead of building this to a Starrcade match that could have been a big pay-per-view marquee match with the face and the newly heel Billy Kidman, it's now just going to be a, to be fair, main event of Nitro on next week's show, and that's just to do with how Billy Kidman has performed overall. I had a couple of matches in mind through the course of putting together the Starrcade card that could have really been very, very beneficial for Billy Kidman. 2 title matches. It was either Rob Van Dam versus Billy Kidman, and I also had a new tag team partner / muscle for Billy Kidman to enlist, and they were going to go for the tag team titles. Now, I'd be surprised if Billy Kidman makes the Starrcade card at all. We then get our third match of the night, and it is Buff Bagwell, his first match since re-signing with the company, and Shane McMahon decided to put him in the match that resulted in him walking out. Of course, it was Buff Bagwell versus the Sandman that Buff Bagwell walked out of after taking just too much of a beating, and he then went to the back and quit. Now, after a few months, he is back, signed to WCW, and I guess the first test is whether he can withstand the Sandman's barrage. Now, the match is basically booked as a very, very one-sided match in the favour of the Sandman, who is, of course, much more well-versed in weapon usage than Buff Bagwell. But what we're trying to get across here is that Buff Bagwell can take it now. He takes cane shot after cane shot after cane shot, and there's one point where Sandman is basically asking him if he can take it. Buff Bagwell's on his knees, his chest red from the cane shots, and he says, "Sandman, give me another." So a bit of a play on when I think Sandman did the same to Tommy Dreamer in ECW when he said, "Thank you, sir, can I have another?" So Buff Bagwell showing that he can take the damage. However, when the Sandman looks to be ready to bring the suffering to an end, Hugh Morrus and Sir Nelson Knight come out from the back. Now, this distracts the Sandman. He wants to fight both of them, and we get the dilemma that Buff Bagwell has. He's been trying to do things the right way, but also he now has the opportunity to escape, and unfortunately, the nature of Buff Bagwell, as much as we want to see that he's changed, as much as that he has tried to change, that opportunistic streak is still within him, and he low blows the Sandman and rolls him up. And after the match, what we're getting across is that Buff Bagwell is really torn about this. So this isn't us abandoning the potential face turn of Buff Bagwell, who was really off his game but still did okay, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm happy with a 60 rating, and I'm happy with the 2 performances. He's kind of gone back to his old ways, but we can tell that it's not something he's necessarily happy about. It's just what he had to do to get the win. Hugh Morrus and Sir Nelson Knight then lay into the Sandman, and while Tommy Dreamer does try and get involved to back him up, he too is laid out by the 2 members of the King's Court. As the attack continues, the lights go out again, a little rerun of last week when Sabu makes his second appearance in WCW, launches a chair at Hugh Morrus to knock him to the outside, swings wildly at Sir Nelson Knight that sends him to the outside before taking a huge dive from the ring to take out the absolutely humongous Sir Nelson Knight. Sabu then lays hands into the head of Knight when he's on the ground before turning his attention to Jerry the King Lawler. Lawler does his best to get out of there, but is caught by the very quick, wild and feral Sabu before he manages. Sabu drags Jerry back towards the commentary position by his singlet, with King looking absolutely understandably terrified of this absolute savage that is Sabu. Just as Sabu is about to hurt Jerry, his son Brian comes out from the back, jumping on his back in an attempt to save his father. Sabu tosses him off his back quite easily and onto the table, but this does allow Jerry to escape, taking a steel chair and climbing up a piece of the set. I seem to remember WWE's commentary set that was by the side of the stage had a bit of like metal around it or something you could climb, whatever it is, around the commentary position. Sabu gets up and puts Prince Brian Lawler through the table, standing from a safe distance so that Sabu can't get to him. Jerry is begging Sabu not to go through with this, but you're not going to reason with somebody like Sabu, and it is too late by the time that Brian is put through the table. Jerry watches on in horror, but also decides he better get out there before Sabu turns his attention to him. So again, advancing 2 storylines in one here. I know Buff doesn't really have a rival, so the storyline's kind of been pushed just by Buff, to be fair, but I felt this was a good full circle way to bring him back on to Nitro, but continuing to delve a little bit deeper into his character. I don't just want him all of a sudden being a good guy, so we're having those little moments of uncertainty before I think we will actually see now a Buff Bagwell face turn in future. And of course, just basically the other part of this segment was putting over. As bad as the Sandman and Tommy Dreamer were for Jerry the King Lawler, this guy is so much worse because he simply cannot be controlled. In the back, we follow up Jerry the King Lawler, who is shown making his way to the office of Shane McMahon. He enters the room as Ric Flair leaves, and the two have a little bit of a momentary stare down before Jerry the King Lawler does go in and speaks with Shane McMahon, asking if he just saw Sabu put his hands on him. If Lance is getting fired for what he did to Shane, then maybe Sabu should be out of here just as soon as he's arrived. Shane says that Tommy and the Sandman agreed to that no contact with the King, but he can't see him getting Sabu to sign anything like that, let alone something that stops him getting his hands on Jerry the King Lawler. Perhaps if Jerry hadn't have made this physical in the first place, none of this would have been happening. That's maybe something for Jerry to think about. Jerry doesn't appreciate the words of Shane McMahon and demands action from the man in charge. Shane says that Jerry's been talking on commentary about what he did to Dreamer and Sandman. He fought both of them in Extreme Rules and he beat them both, right? Maybe he can fight Sabu next. How does that sound for a solution? Jerry asks him if he's crazy and storms out of the office, unhappy with the lack of resolution. McMahon says that's fine, but Jerry can find a substitute replacement because Sabu will be making his in-ring debut next week, and it's going to be against a member of the King's Court. Jerry the King Lawler leaves the room saying that he has the perfect opponent for Sabu. Sir Nelson Knight is going to squash that maniac, and then his problem will be solved after all. So a really good 70 rated segment, adding heat to the R versus Extreme Outsiders storyline and advancing the return of Ric Flair, because he left the office this time with much more of a positive outlook than we saw last time. Remember a couple of weeks ago he called Shane a son of a bitch, so obviously much more productive discussions taking place this week. Juventud Guerrera leads his Lucha Real associates Psicosis and Chavo Guerrero Jr. to the ring. Chavo Guerrero speaking first, saying that he'd explain why he decided to align himself with the Lucha royalty in the ring, but it's pretty obvious. The name Guerrero is sacred in Lucha Libre, and it was just a bonus that he got to join these men by costing Sugar Shane the Cruiserweight title. Maybe Shane's going to feel a little less smug about costing Chavo his place in the Cruiserweight division all those months ago, now that he's seen what Chavo can cost him. Juventud says that now the three of them together, anything is possible. Super Crazy crossed them last week, and now he's out on the sidelines, and maybe somebody wants to check on Yoshihiro Tajiri because they just ran into him in the back on their way to the ring, and they reckon he's not going to be in such a good condition either. They hope that that is a warning as to the power and influence that they hold in this Cruiserweight division. Even from outside the division, Chavo holds more influence than anybody else, apart from the champion, of course. But that brings them to the man who made the biggest mistake of his life last week, Rey Mysterio Jr. The three men in the ring know all about that guy, and in fact, Juventud reached out to him weeks ago just after Psicosis and Juventud themselves came back to WCW, and they offered him a chance to wine with the Kings. They could have been the three kings of WCW's Cruiserweight division, but he instead decided to make three powerful enemies instead last week. Coming out from the back, AJ Styles and Sugar Shane come to the top of the ramp before being joined by Rey Mysterio Jr. the past, the present and the future of the Cruiserweight division, you could say, are stood at the top of the ramp, with Rey Mysterio Jr. holding the mask that he took from Chavo last week. Rey Mysterio Jr. says that he isn't here, he hasn't come back to go after the Cruiserweight champion, because it's time for AJ and Sugar Shane to take on that mantle and hold this division down. Rey Mysterio Jr. throws his old mask down and pulls out a modified one from his jacket. So we saw him kind of wear a half mask towards the end of WCW. I think the mask that he had where the back was his head, but the front still covered his face, I think that works for us in that it's different enough from his old mask that we can probably just about get away with justifying it as a new lineage. I think just having him come back in the full mask, I wasn't so sure about, so I just want to present this as a new lineage and a new legacy, the same mask but with that open back design, and he is here to settle an old score. Rey then puts the mask on, laces it round the back, and next week it's going to be Lucha Real versus AJ Styles, Sugar Shane and Rey Mysterio, so he will be dropping the junior going forward as he did in the WWE. I'm not really sure how sort of legit this is within the Lucha tradition, but he's got a slightly different name, a slightly different mask, so that's just how I'm going to try and get away with the fact that we have basically retconned Rey Mysterio losing his mask in WCW, but I think the bigger crime was getting rid of that marketing and merchandising opportunity. Some people might not like it, but I just think him losing the mask in the first place was absolutely ridiculous, so it is what it is. Now this is a very poor segment, but rest assured these guys will be more often in matches in the future rather than just segments. We then get a video package that looks at the monstrous undefeated streak of Big Van Vader, stretching across 2 promotions, 2 countries and 2 continents between WCW and Pro Wrestling Noah. Now Big Van Vader has left Pro Wrestling Noah, but we still have a working agreement with them, so we're using that footage and selectively using that footage because the fact that he's lost matches in Pro Wrestling Noah is being ignored, and I'm just point blank lying at this point. Nobody's been able to stop Vader in months and months now, and tonight he gives Booker T the toughest challenge of his WCW World Heavyweight Championship reign so far. Each of Big Van Vader's 10 victories in WCW are chronicled. Booker T himself has only been pinned once in that time, and he's been doing it while facing World Championship caliber challengers for all that time, so it's not a foregone conclusion that Big Van Vader is the favourite in this match. We then see in the back as Ric Flair is about to head out to be in the corner of the World Heavyweight Champion Booker T. He is approached by Arn Anderson. The two are very positive about the talks that took place earlier tonight, and it's kind of them two catching up while Shane's not here. Arn says that Shane wants the two of them to go to the ring and announce what they've agreed upon next week on Nitro. So Ric Flair's going to be here next week, and it's going to be Rick and Arn Anderson making that announcement together. Ric Flair says that that sounds absolutely great to him. There's nothing like being out there live in front of the WCW fans, and well, he can't wait to do that before this huge main event match. Arn Anderson says that Shane McMahon also has a little bit of a surprise for the Nature Boy, and Arn thinks it's going to be something that he will love. Ric Flair asks him what it is. He doesn't want to have to wait a week to find out, but Arn says, I think that's your cue or whatever, it's time to go out to the ring. We then get the main event match for the World Heavyweight Championship, and it is absolutely fantastic, by far the best match that Big Van Vader has had, so absolutely credit to Booker T for the carry job here. And this is yet another example where plans changed. Big Van Vader was originally going to challenge Rob Van Dam for the United States Championship at Starrcade, but I've not been impressed with Big Van Vader enough. I did say that I'd let the game somewhat dictate in that sense. I'm not just going to go through with a push with somebody that's not connecting in game just because it's what I want to do. Now, there may be exceptions to that, to be fair, but in general, Big Van Vader just hasn't done what I brought him in to do, and sometimes that can happen in wrestling. So, plans changed. We brought it forward as an end to this mini Booker T versus the Triad storyline, and Kanyon and Hennig, of course, do try and get involved, but Ric Flair is there to point out what they're doing to the ref, and we're putting across the dirtiest player in the game. He knows every trick in the book, and that is why he is always one step ahead of the heels. We even get a very, very close fall for Big Van Vader, hitting his finisher, but Rick is able to point out to the referee that Booker T's foot is under the rope, so Ric Flair very much doing Booker T a favour there. If he'd have missed that, we would have had a new World Heavyweight Champion, but eventually a big bookend by Booker T to Big Van Vader spells the end of the match. Now, I do see that I've put another Steal the Show match. Now, this has stolen the show. I normally try and avoid having more than one Steal the Show per per episode, but it looks like we've not lost anything because of it. A fantastic performance from Booker T, and that is very encouraging going into Starrcade 2001. After the match, Booker T stands tall, Ric Flair entering the ring to shake his hand. Booker's very, very thankful for his assistance, of course. Booker celebrates in the ring, and Ric Flair brings him in close. He wants a hug. However, as this hug is going on, a man jumps the guardrail with a steel pipe and clocks Booker T from behind. Ric Flair is shocked and rolls quickly out of the ring. He doesn't want to be the next victim of this man holding a steel pipe. The man then puts Booker T in a camel clutch, or should I say a Steiner recliner, as the man removes his hood to reveal the former WCW World Champion Scott Steiner. He lost the title on the very last episode of Nitro on the 26th of March 2001. Well, he's back 8 months later with only an adequate gimmick rating. That's a little bit disappointing, I will admit, but a fantastic debut segment for him. A 78 is really, really good. Unfortunately, a small penalty to charisma during matches and angles. Well, this big Papa Pump gimmick could not be further away from the truth then, because Scott Steiner is the definition of charisma. If he didn't have that, he wouldn't have much else carrying his performances. Scott Steiner back in WCW. I had some comments maybe saying that Scott Steiner wasn't up to being in this main event position at this time, but I've decided to go with the name value maybe over the in-ring performance, and we might see at Starrcade a complete disaster of a main event, but without announcing it here, of course. It's pretty clear that this will be our big show. A 77 is a really, really good rating, increasing our popularity in 8 regions. So yeah, very, very happy with that show overall. Jerry Lawler and Kurt Hennig arguing between Nitro and Worldwide, but that is the end of Nitro. I thought a really good, well-rounded episode. As I said, I think I might have said this in a comment, I can't remember if it was the last video or a comment to be fair, but having a thread throughout the show that you follow really does bring shows together. Instead of feeling like random segments thrown together, they feel like proper shows. So hopefully we can do something similar with this week's episode of WCW Worldwide. A lot of people, again, not used. Shawn Stasiak there, it does say he's not been used and he is eligible to be on the show, but as we know, he said, nah, that's not for me, thanks. So he won't be there, but all those other people potentially will be appearing, and hopefully it will be a good show that I put together. I'm going to be honest, I've not fully booked Worldwide, so I can't tell you what's going to happen on it, but you'll see very, very shortly whether I throw together something decent or not. So I think I've managed to book a fairly decent episode of Worldwide here, using everybody but a handful who are sort of not on screen for storyline reasons. Stacy Keibler is one who misses out, to be fair, through no fault of her own. Shawn Stasiak doesn't want to come to work, so unfortunately she too isn't going to be on the screen, but it does give me opportunity to do something a little bit better with her going forward, as she has literally just been a manager on the outside and ineffective at that, given how few victories Shawn Stasiak has managed to achieve. But we begin with one of the good segments, I'd say, on the show. There's a bit of filler, as there always is on Worldwide. I'll try and rattle through that where I can, but this is a segment that I am going to go into a little bit, because Crowbar calls out Jet to open the show. We've seen the last 2 shows end with them facing off and one of them winning each of the matches, so they are tied at 1-1, and Crowbar thinks that they need to end this, draw a line under it once and for all. Jet comes out and says that he's got better things to be doing now. He's obviously moved onwards and upwards from Crowbar, but when it came to a singles match, Jet wrestled rings around Crowbar. It's only the fact that Crowbar managed to get him into a garbage match that meant he got a win back. Crowbar says, be that as it may, the record books show them at 1 win each, so how about it? In a match of Jet's choosing, they face off one last time. Jet says, how about this? I leave you to fade to obscurity while I keep under the learning tree of Kanyon and the Triad. Crowbar doesn't take too kindly to this and starts to fight with Jet. The 2 men brawl, but Crowbar gets the better of him, eventually ending up with Jet in the Rings of Saturn, and he is telling him, if you want me to let go, then tap out. Jet taps out, then rolls out the ring, embarrassed by Crowbar. So if he didn't want to fight him before, perhaps being shown up essentially, maybe that will tempt him into agreeing to that 3rd match. We then get Jerry Lynn talking to Christopher Daniels in the back. They'll face Elite Skipper and Kid Romeo tonight, Prime example of one of our filler segments there. We then get another of our usual matches that feature completely unimportant people, but it's still okay as Diamond and Swinger defeat 3 Count, a handful of tights from Simon Diamond as he pins Evan Courageous. After the match, we see on screen Pete Gas and Rodney on their backs. They've been taken out by the Young Dragons, who are delighted with what they've done. This started with the Young Dragons laughing at Pete Gas and Rodney, and well, they're doing that again. The expectation is that Diamond and Swinger will spring into action. Of course, this is their associates, but they kind of shrug and give each other a look that says, I guess we got to go and deal with this. I've just realised I didn't follow this up for the rest of the night, so actually, should I go back and add a little skit that ties this off? I think I'll just accept my mistake and follow it up next week with Gas and Rodney being like, why didn't you even show up for us? It kind of plays into the storyline dynamic that we've got, and I'm too lazy to go back and change it. David Flair complains to Jimmy Hart in the back, saying that last week wasn't really fair because he didn't know who his opponent was going to be coming into the match. Jimmy says that to make it in this business, you have to know one thing, and that is that anything can happen. That's what Jimmy was trying to prepare David for last week. David tells Jimmy that he needs just one more chance to prove himself, and he's sure that he can get the win if Jimmy just gives him the time to prepare. David says that he is a student of the game, and if he can watch footage of the person that he's gonna face next week, then he can beat them. When Jimmy pushes back again, David says that Jimmy might not want to make an enemy out of him, especially at the minute. Maybe when he hears what Shane's big announcement for his father is next week, he'll think a little bit differently, but Jimmy doesn't take too kindly to this threat. He doesn't care who David Flair's father is, and he tells David that he'll do him a favour. He's going to call Shane McMahon later tonight, and he's going to see who Shane doesn't mind sending down to fight David Flair next week on Worldwide, and he'll know before the end of the night who his opponent will be, and we'll see if he does any better. But the idea here is that Jimmy Hart is going to find somebody who he feels is going to be very difficult for David Flair to defeat. Cash and Noble interviewed about their main event match against Super Crazy and Yoshihiro Tajiri. Kiwi cuts a promo before the match with Guido, suggesting that they don't need to do all this tonight, especially when Guido is having such issues with the Mamalukes he can't get them in line. Surely Guido doesn't want to have this match and instead would like to talk through those issues. He tells Guido that sometimes it's good to talk. Guido nods in agreement to this, to the delight of Kiwi, before adding, and sometimes it's good to shut your mouth. He then slaps Kiwi, who switches gears upon hearing this, and the fight begins. It's another match between two unimportant people, but a good performance from Guido as he squashes Kiwi in 3 minutes and 34, making him tap out with, as I've now correctly put in his moveset, the Fujiwara armbar. Guido then takes the microphone after the match, bringing out Johnny the Bull, Reno and Vito, who are now wearing not necessarily the exact same gear, but something that indicates that they are all now on the same page, and also bearing the crest of their new stable, which I'll show you as I set it up after this show. It appears whatever they've done, they are now on the same page, and Guido says that this family knows a thing or two about waste management, and they're here to clean up WCW Worldwide. They see a lot of garbage up and down the hallways in the back, but the biggest piece might have just been made to tap in the middle of the ring. Guido says that it is time for the trash to be taken out on Saturday nights, and you can thank the Consiglio Italo Americano for that. Now, I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. I don't necessarily know that that is correct grammar, but if you can spot the initialism, then yeah, that's what we're doing. Might be a little bit cheesy, but we're turning Reno face, and the Mamalukes and Guido are now together in that stable. Now, I am hoping that that is grammatically correct, but if it's not, it just plays into the whole daftness and comedy of the FBI homage that we are playing. Jimmy Hart tells David Flair he's got a match next week. His opponent is going to be a fellow second-generation star, Dustin Rhodes. Christopher Daniels and Jerry Lynn defeat Romeo and Skipper, and despite this being a match with somebody who is considered recognisable or above, I put it as a high spots rated match, so the crowd not hyped enough for that, so therefore it's not as good as it could have been. Chris Daniels, the best performer of the four, despite being what I would say is probably comfortably at the least over, but Jerry Lynn gets the pin on Kid Romeo with a cradle power driver. Probably would have been better just leaving this one as a regular match. Jerry Lynn raises the hand of Christopher Daniels and gives him a little bit of credit. Well done, good lad, Here's the rub. Mike Sanders approaches Lashley in the back, who is happy to have seen his friend Christopher Daniels and Jerry Lynn pick up the win, and Mike Sanders questions him on being happy about this. Lash stood up for Daniels last week, and then when he needed a partner, he turned to a newcomer like Jerry Lynn. Sanders says that he'd take that as a slap in the face personally, and he knows all about being slapped in the face by your so-called friends. Lash ignores him, he's not getting into this, but Sanders says that is the difference between you and I. He does something about it when somebody screws him over. He then comes to the ring and cuts a really good promo. Probably the first green shoot we've seen from Mike Sanders throughout this save so far. I've used him as a jobber, and even still he can get a nearly 60 rated promo left to improvise, which perhaps plays into his favour. But Sanders comes to the ring and cuts a promo. Matt Jindrak walked out on him. Shawn Stasiak decided that after tapping out to Guido, he can't handle coming back to work and showing his face, so that just leaves Sanders. Throughout his time in WCW, he's always had a friend to call upon, but Reno betrayed him and joined whatever that stable we just saw formed is earlier, and Chuck and Shawn, well, they no longer answer his calls. So now, he's above average, and he is all alone. That would humble some men, but not Mike Sanders. He stands alone because he is in a league of his own. He now has the freedom to do as he pleases, and next week he is going to prove to the entire WCW roster that he is not playing around. So a fairly generic promo, but it was just about seeing how good he did out there, and this is undoubtedly a pass from Mike Sanders, so good on him. Crowbar then cuts a promo gloating about making Jet tap out earlier, and he attempts to goad him into a third match. I am actually going to go back here and put in that segment with the Diamond and Swinger and Rodney and Pete Gas, because I do think I need to follow that up. And yeah, being lazy isn't really a good thing, is it? And I've just shaved a minute off a really good main event to put this semi-pointless skit in, but Diamond and Swinger check on Pete Gas and Rodney in the back, but it's clear they've been to shower, change and get coffee before coming to check on them. Kind of felt I had to put something in there to explain why it had been so long, but again, luckily it fits into the personas. Gas and Rodney kind of lean into this, where have you been, what took you so long? Diamond and Swinger kind of shrug, Swinger saying there wasn't much they could have done anyway, you'd already had your asses kicked by the Young Dragon, so what could we have done? Gas and Rodney are pretty annoyed by this and say we'll see about that. They're going to fight the Young Dragons next week. Started with them, and it's going to end with them on next week's Saturday Night Worldwide. Now this doesn't advance the storyline because they're all on the same side, but it should have done. Whatever. We then get a solid main event, not fantastic, but solid. Good performance from Tajiri, decent from Super Crazy and Cash, and Jamie Noble just a little bit behind. But it's a clean victory for Crazy and Tajiri. Tajiri pinning Jamie Noble with a brainbuster. We let them steal the show. They've obviously not done that, but it was the last match of the recording, so we just said do your best, and it was a decent match. Get Super Crazy and Yoshihiro Tajiri on TV after they were both not used on Nitro this week, albeit for storyline purposes. We make money as we always seem to, and gain popularity in a number of regions. So again, as I said, we took a few steps back to start off as I struggled finding my feet at the beginning of this save, but we are now doing really, really well. I think it was a 77 rated episode of Nitro, and when you actually look at the setup of the show, I think that everything came together. It felt like a well-connected show. We had the storyline throughout the night and tried to cross over as many different angles as we could so that everything feels alive. We've got a proper alive universe in WCW and people aren't just sticking to their own business. Chavo Guerrero getting some praise from Booker T. A good rating for this week's episode of WCW Nitro, and it's something that I've started doing pretty regularly now just to check where these shows come. This is the third best episode of Nitro that we've done, and the match between Booker T and Big Van Vader is in the top 10, so a really successful show, I'd have to say, and not far off being our best rated. So that is this week's episode. Hope you've enjoyed it. I hope that the build to Starrcade feels exciting and we've got plenty of forward momentum. Again, a lot planned for next week's show, but I will just form before I finish this video. So Guido, of course, is the leader of this brotherhood. We've then got Vito Lagrasso as a member, Johnny the Bull as a member, and Reno as a member. But the most important thing, of course, is the fact that we have a pretty cool logo for this stable. The FBI becomes the CIA. IA. 4 stables in the company now, all with pretty cool logos, I'm sure you'll agree. I'll do a little bit of admin off screen before the show, such as renaming Reno and things like that don't really matter. For example, I'll check off screen whether I've just spelled his name correctly or not. I don't think I have actually, so I am going to just double check that. But like I say, that is not things that you need to be seeing. We'll leave the episode here. Ric Flair and Shane McMahon's huge announcement next week as to the future of Ric Flair in WCW. I think that's a lot more interesting than seeing me rename members of a B-show stable. And that is the end of the episode. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.